Calev Ben David, the reason why that question is being asked is clearly Israel is well within its right to respond in a manner in which it chooses, but even its staunchest allies, including the United States, and senior officials have said this on record today, that through the course of this operation, they expect Israel to maintain the laws of war, that there is a distinction between civilians and combatants, and that you cannot target one in the name of the other. The challenge before Israel is how do you, and rightfully so, like I said, Hamas needs to be attacked, Hamas infrastructure needs to be attacked, but how do you take on an enemy who takes cover behind civilians? And Israel runs the risk of collateral damage to the tune of tens of thousands, because it's a small enclave of 2 million plus people.
I'm going to answer that. First, I do want to just, with all due respect, to correct you. There was no IDF statement contradicting the reporting that initially was done by our reporter from I-24 News down at Far Aga. IDF officials have since confirmed it. There have actually been no conflicting reports. There have been people on Twitter saying Hamas doesn't kill women and children, which is, of course, absurd. So this is established. You could reference some of the own reporting done by Nick Robinson of CNN. So I just want to make, I do want to make that clear. We are limited, of course, to what we can show on television, but you can go on social media and see the atrocities that are being committed. So I just do want to make that clear. To answer your question, it is a hard question. Unfortunately, for Israel to root out Hamas, there are going to be civilian casualties, but Israel is not targeting those civilians. This is Hamas using those civilians as human shield. It's regrettable. My father fought in World War II on the side of the United States, and I hate to say, many Germans and Japanese civilians were killed as the United States fought that war. There is sometimes that collateral damage when you're fighting an enemy who is ruthlessly using civilians as human shields. I can only tell you, based on my experience as a journalist and as someone who served in also the Israeli Defense Forces, they will make every effort not to kill civilians. But I'm not saying that it's not impossible that that fighting an enemy like Hamas, that would become almost impossible to do. And I regret that. And Israelis will regret that. They will not celebrate it. But it will be a dilemma. I don't deny that. As the war goes on, Israel might come under international pressure. But its goal is, I would say, liberation, to liberate Gaza from Hamas, because the 1.5 million Palestinians there have been basically held hostage from Hamas since it took over that area in a violent takeover from the Fatah movement.
No, but I want to come back to that point that you made. I mean, yes, liberation of Gaza from Hamas. How did that come about? Hamas came about because after 2005-06, after the last major clash that we saw in Gaza, Israel walked away. There was a political vacuum. The promises that were kept as part of the Oslo Accords were not kept.
Right.
So isn't that a fair question? No, can I just finish, please? 30 seconds.
Sure.
Isn't it a fair question to ask that if the political vacuum at the end of that operation was occupied by Hamas, and then I'm not holding the brief for this violent terrorist organization for even a moment, but shouldn't a question also be asked as to why that political vacuum was left behind, and B, what happens to all those promises that were unkept to the so-called moderate faction, which led to the creation of this more extremist faction?
I will answer that question because I covered all those events as a journalist here in Israel. Israel withdrew, as you say, all its forces and 9,000 civilians from Gaza in 2005. An election was then held the next year in which Fatah won, and Israel was pressured by Europe and the United States to allow Hamas to take part in that election. I have to remind, there was an election in Gaza following that election in which Hamas did achieve something of a majority in the one representative body. It entered into a joint government with the Fatah movement that still controls Palestinian areas in the West Bank. In 2007, Hamas had a violent takeover of the Gaza Strip from the Fatah movement, at point which they killed many members and officials from Fatah. They literally threw them off the tops of buildings. So you're incorrect. There was a political process. Israel really did hope that it would establish, there would be some kind of political entity similar to what is in the now still exists in the Palestinian areas in the West Bank, would be established in Gaza. But Hamas took it over in a violent takeover. That's
Okay.
how that situation came about.
So, Flower Hassan Nahum, so then what is the game plan now? You have airstrikes very soon. There will be a ground operation. The troops might hold the ground for some time. But thereafter, what? I mean, what is the objective here? Destroying Hamas is one thing, and perhaps rightfully so, especially after what happened over the weekend. That was the last straw. But after destroying Hamas, then what?
Well, first of all, we have to root out the terrorist infrastructure. Ultimately, you can't have a bordering country because, as Calev said, we withdrew completely and there was no vacuum. Calev is completely right. There was a process. Hamas took over. And in general, the Palestinians had a choice. They could have turned the Gaza Strip into Dubai, and instead they turned it into Beirut by allying themselves with the worst genocidal regimes in the world. One of them, of course, is Iran. Hamas is a proxy of Iran, as is Hezbollah. And so the question really is for Israel, but it's also for the entire world. What is it that we want when we have a genocidal regime that basically tells us constantly that they want to turn the world into and bring us back 500 years and turn the world into an entire caliphate? So it shouldn't just be seen as our problem because it's a regional and a global problem. And so this is why the world has to stand with Israel, because we are the first stop in the ambitions of these genocidal regimes in order to take over first the region and then the world. And so maybe I sound hyperbolic, but this is what they say themselves. And suddenly the Iranian regime completely, constantly are repeating this rhetoric. And so what Israel has to do is uproot the terrorist infrastructure and cut the head of the snake, which is Hamas, and give the Palestinian people a chance perhaps to have leadership that care about them, that want their prosperity, that want peace, and that want to be good neighbors with Israel. That would really be the best scenario. Is it going to happen quickly? I don't know. The Palestinian Authority perhaps could be involved in the next stage of the process because they were brutally kicked out of the Gaza Strip? Perhaps. But these are questions that will become clearer, and the answers will become clearer as the weeks go on.
But Dr.